Well, we are ready for 2 Samuel, which 2 Samuel, Samuel himself is not really a figure in 2 Samuel, but originally 1 and 2 Samuel were all one book. And of course Samuel is the dominant character at the beginning of the book. But 2 Samuel is really, could better be called the book of David, because David is the central figure in 2 Samuel. And I think David has got to be the most fascinating person in the Old Testament. He is a complicated man. He is by far not a perfect man. He is a great leader. He also makes some horrible mistakes. He is a very complex person. A very dynamic and fascinating person. And the book of 2 Samuel is the story of him, his rise to becoming a king. In the middle of that, we'll also see the dynamics of his own family and many tragedies inside his own family. It's got a lot in it, so we got a lot to go. And so if you remember, if you're here last week, 1 Samuel ends with the death of Saul and Jonathan. Remember last week, Saul, the first king of Israel, became paranoid, jealous, unstable in his jealousy of David, the fear that David was going to replace him and take his throne. David had no intention of that. David was loyal to Saul and to Saul's family, but Saul became so jealous and fearful of David and his popularity and his charisma that he decided to kill David. David was hunted. David was on the run. David could have taken Saul's life on a couple of different occasions and chose not to. But at the end of the 1 Samuel, when Saul is fighting the Philistines along with his son Jonathan, they are killed. And Saul is mortally wounded. He asks his armor bearer to finish him off, lest the Philistines be the one to perhaps torture him. And he wants to have a quick death. His armor bearer won't do it. And so Saul falls on his sword. They take their bodies of Saul and Jonathan, and the Philistines put them on display in Bet-Shan. I mentioned that's a place that those of us who went to the Holy Land got to visit, Bet-Shan. And then the last thing we heard about is how one of the villages that Saul had rescued early on in his reign as monarch, who were still loyal to Saul, they snuck in, stole the bodies back out so they wouldn't be there on display, and gave them a decent burial. And that's where the book of 1 Samuel ended, with the death of Saul. And so we open up 2 Samuel, the first sentence after the death of Saul. And a messenger comes to him. It says 3 days after the death of Saul, this man comes to him. This is in 2 Samuel 1. And he says he's escaped from the Israeli camp. And gives the report. Verse 4, David says, tell me what happened. Verse 4, 1:4, the men fled from battle, many of them fell and died, and Saul and his son Jonathan are dead. And remember, Jonathan is David's best friend. He's as close as a brother. And David says, well, how do you know this? And, well, he says, I was there. And actually, after Saul fell on his sword, he still wasn't dead. And he called out to me. And verse 8, who are you? I'm an Amalekite. Verse 9, Saul said to me, stand over me and kill me. I'm in the throes of death, but I'm still alive. It says, so I did it. I finished him off. And then I took the crown that was on his head, because he was the king, and I brought it back to you, David. I'm giving you the crown. And David tears his clothes. He weeps. And then, again, he says to this messenger, now who are you again? Verse 13, I'm an Amalekite. He says, who do you think you are to kill the king? To destroy the Lord's anointed. And David says to his men, kill him. And they do. David did not see this as a positive thing, especially since it seemed that the man, by bringing him the crown, was trying to curry some sort of favor. David doesn't buy into that. And kills, there's the old, the message killed the messenger. Well, he was more than just a messenger. He had finished Saul off at Saul's request, at least, or so he said. Whether that's true, we don't know. But David does not take kindly to that, has him killed, and then begins to mourn for Saul and Jonathan. And the rest of the first chapter is a poem of mourning. David mourning for Saul and Jonathan. Notice the phrase, it begins in verse 19. Notice the phrase, how the mighty have fallen, which is a phrase that we kind of have come into our. And he memorializes Saul and Jonathan. Look at verse 23. Saul and Jonathan, in life they were loved and gracious, in death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. And then notice farther on down, verse 26, I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. How the mighty have fallen, the weapons of war have perished. David, even though Saul had made himself an enemy, even though Saul had tried to kill David on more than one occasion, David mourns for Saul and, of course, for his good friend Jonathan. So, Saul is dead. The king is dead. And David moves and goes into the tribe of Judah to one of the towns. And he goes to Hebron in Judah. He's got two of his wives with him. Not all of his wives. Notice he has Ahinoam and Abigail. We didn't really spend time on the story of Abigail. Abigail, the widow of a noxious man named Nabal that was insulting to David and then died, and David took Abigail as his bride. So men from Judah come, verse 4, and there they say to David, we want you to be our king. Remember, Samuel had anointed David king years and years earlier, but that was in private. But now the men of Judah, the tribe of Judah, which is the largest tribe of the 12 tribes, they say, we want you to be the king of our tribe. And David accepts this, and he is now the king of Judah, but he's not the king of the entire nation. Because with the fall of Saul, Saul has sons, not just Jonathan. Saul has other sons. And we learn in verse 8 of 2 that Saul's son Ishbosheth has been named the king of the north, the king of Israel. And there is a general under Saul's command named Abner. And he's going to become a major player here. So we have Saul's family, and his son Ishbosheth is named the new king of the north, the new king of Israel. And the general, the commander of his forces, is Abner. Okay, and that name is going to come into play quite a bit older. So Ishbosheth is the new king of the north, General Abner. And it says, notice there in 2:10, Ishbosheth, son of Saul, was 40 years old. When he became king over Israel, he reigned 2 years. The house of Judah, however, followed David. The length of time David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. So we've got the beginnings, or at least it seems like a divided kingdom here. So David has a general of his men named Joab. Okay? So over here on David's side, we have General Joab. And these two men are going to play an important role. David's General Joab, Ishbosheth's General Abner. They meet up at something of a summit in chapter 2 and suggest that they have some combat between the young men. 2:14. Let's have some of the young men get up and fight hand to hand in front of us. All right, let's do it. These two generals propose 12 young men from each side have hand-to-hand comment. And notice it says, verse 16, each man grabbed his opponent by the head, thrust his dagger into his opponent's side, which is a little more than just hand-to-hand. 17, the battle that day was fierce. Abner and the men of Israel were defeated by David's men. So this turns into a full-scale skirmish and war. Okay, so Joab has two brothers. Notice there at verse 18. Joab, the commander of David's forces, has two brothers. Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Okay? There are three brothers. It says, now Asahel was fleet-footed as a wild gazelle. He's chasing Abner. Okay? So Joab's brother is chasing Abner. And it says, look at verse 20, 2:20. Abner looked behind him and said, "Is that you, Asahel?" "It is." Abner said to him, "Turn aside to the right or the left. Take on one of the young men. Strip him of his weapons." Asahel would not stop chasing him. Again, Abner warned Asahel, "Stop chasing me. Why should I strike you down? How could I look your brother Joab in the face?" So these are two men, military men, leaders, who have respect for each other even though they're supporting different kings. He says, "Stop following me or I'm going to have to kill you." But Asahel refused to give up the pursuit, so Abner thrust the butt of his spear into Asahel's stomach, and the spear came out through his back.
That's gross.
He fell there and died on the spot. And every man stopped when he came to the place where Asahel had fallen and died. But Joab and Abishai, the two remaining brothers, pursued Abner as the sun was setting, came to a hill. It says the men of Benjamin rallied behind Abner. And then finally Abner calls out to Joab, "Must the sword devour forever? Don't you realize this will end in bitterness? How long before you order your men to stop pursuing their brothers? This is going to turn into a full-scale war if we don't stop this." And Joab says, "Well, as surely as God lives, if you hadn't spoken, my men would continue the pursuit until morning." So Joab blows the trumpet, they stop the pursuit, and the skirmish is over. Okay? But, verse 30, Joab returned from pursuing Abner, assembled his men. Besides Asahel, 19 of David's men were found missing. But David's men had killed 360 Benjamites who were with Abner. They took Asahel and buried him in his father's tomb. So, David's men have killed many more of Saul's men, or Ishbosheth's men. And this is the beginning of a protracted struggle. But we get the key to what's going to happen in the first verse of chapter 3. The war between the house of Saul and the house of David lasted a long time. David grew stronger and stronger, while the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. So David's forces and David's power is growing. Ishbosheth's power keeps decreasing. And then we happen to mention David's sons, just kind of in the middle of this. We're told the name of his sons. That's going to come into play later. Now, going down to 3:6. During this war, Abner had been strengthening his own position in the house of Saul. Okay, so General Abner, it says, was strengthening his position. And then, what's he do in verse 7? Saul had had a concubine named Rizpah, and Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Why did you sleep with my father's concubine?" So Abner slept with one of Saul's harem girls. Why would he do that? And it's not just lust. Huh? Power. What kind of statement does it make for Abner to sleep with one of Saul's harem girls?
He's after power one.
It's a way of him declaring his own power. This is going to happen in other times in this story. The idea of when you take one of the women of a king, you are making a political statement. So Ishbosheth, who we already realized is growing weaker and weaker, says to his general, "Why did you sleep with one of my father's concubines?" Abner, verse 8, was very angry because of what Ishbosheth said and answered, "Am I a dog's head on Judah's side? This very day I am loyal to the house of your father Saul and to his family and friends. I haven't handed you over to David. Now you accuse me of an offense involving this woman? May God deal with Abner, be it ever so severely, if I do not do for David what the Lord promised him on oath, and transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul, and establish David's throne over Israel and Judah from Dan to Beersheba," which is from north to south. And Ishbosheth, who is supposedly the king, Ishbosheth didn't dare say another word because he was afraid of him. Which of these two men is the alpha male? Abner. Abner is the alpha male in this relationship, even though Ishbosheth is the son of the king. Abner's running the show, and when he says, "Hey, you shouldn't be sleeping with my dad's concubine," he's like, "You're going to challenge me over a woman?" You know, and he's like, "Oh, I'm back down." He's afraid of it. And so Abner, General Abner, sends messengers, verse 12, to David, basically saying, "How about I come on over to your side? How about I switch sides?" And David in verse 13 says, "Okay, good. I'll make an agreement with you." You know, David's like, "Sure, you can come over to our side. But if you come over to our side, you need to bring somebody with you. You need to bring Michal with you." Who's Michal? Saul's daughter. Not just Saul's daughter. Who else is she? David's first wife. Remember, way back in the last book, when Saul thinks, "How can I get rid of David and make it look like an accident and keep the blood off my hands?" He says to David, "David, my boy, how'd you like to marry my daughter, Michal, and be the son-in-law of the king?" And he's like, "Oh, I don't know. That's a pretty big step. Be son-in-law of the king." And Saul says, "I'll tell you what. You can earn her by bringing me the foreskins of 100 Philistines." You remember that?
Yeah.
And David went out and collected the foreskins of 200 Philistines and brought them to Saul. And then he got Michal as his wife. So David's first wife is the daughter of Saul. But notice it says when David went to Hebron, he took 2 of his wives with him. Michal wasn't one of them, was she? Because when the split between David and Saul occurred, they pulled Michal away from David and gave her to another man. Here's what's going to say. 3:13. David says, "I'll make an agreement with you. I demand one thing of you. Don't come into my presence unless you bring Michal, daughter of Saul, when you come to see me." Then David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, son of Saul, demanding, "Give me my wife Michal, whom I betrothed to myself for the price of 100 Philistine foreskins." So Ishbosheth gave orders and had her taken away from her husband, Paltiel, son of Laish. Her husband, however, went with her, weeping behind her all the way to Baharim. And Abner said to him, "Go back home." So he went back. So the man that they'd married her off to and they took her away from David is like, "No, no, no." He's weeping and following behind her. And they say, "Go on home." So Abner conferred with the elders of Israel and said, "For some time you wanted to make David your king. Now do it. For the Lord promised David, 'By my servant David I'll rescue my people.'" So Abner comes over to serve David. Is there a potential problem there?
Oh, yeah.
What is the potential problem?
2 generals aren't going to get along.
No, not just 2 generals. What about these 2 generals? Yeah. Remember, Abner killed Joab's brother. Abner killed Joab's brother. And now they're supposed to be generals working under the same leader. So David says, sure, Abner, come on over. But he doesn't consult Joab. So, David makes a deal with Abner to come work for him. But now, verse 22, after he's made a deal with Abner. Just then, David's men and Joab returned from a raid and brought with them a great deal of plunder. But Abner was no longer with David in Hebron, because David had sent him away, and he'd gone in peace. When Joab and all the soldiers with him arrived, he was told that Abner, son of Ner, had come to the king, and the king had sent him away, and they had gone in peace. So Joab went to the king and said, "What have you done? Look, Abner came to you. Why'd you let him go? Now he's gone. You know Abner, son of Ner. He came to deceive you and observe your movements and find out everything you're doing." He is incensed that David has now taken Abner as one of his generals. He says, you can't trust him. He's a spy. He's not going to be loyal to you. So Joab then left David and sent messengers, verse 26, after Abner, and they brought him back from the well of Sirah. But David didn't know about it. When Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside into the gateway, as though they were to speak with him privately. And there, to avenge the blood of his brother Ashel, Joab stabbed him in the stomach, and he died. So, Joab says, yeah, oh, welcome to the team. Here, let's come over here and talk. So that takes care of Abner. Anybody here watch Game of Thrones?
Yeah. Well, it got too confusing.
If you don't, Game of Thrones is a show about all these families and shifting alliances and double crosses and betrayals and murders and assassinations and on and on and on and on. And this is kind of what this is all about.
Like the real world.
Yeah. So, David, when he hears about this, tears his clothes in mourning. And he says to Joab, verse 31, David said to Joab and all the people with him, tear your clothes and put on sackcloth and walk in mourning in front of Abner. Put on a public display of mourning for the guy you just killed. David himself walked behind the bier. They buried Abner in Hebron. The king wept aloud at Abner's tomb, and all the people wept also. Why would David do that? Is he really all broken up over the death of Abner? Because what is David's ultimate goal? To be the king of everything, of both north and south. So how is this a political move?
It's for show.
Okay, what does it show to the public?
Sympathy, empathy.
He's the strongest
I
and they're fearful, should be fearful.
think if, okay, General Grant and General Lee in the Civil War would Grant dance on Lee's grave and celebrate and whoop it up and celebrate the fact that Robert E. Lee is dead?
No.
Why not?
Because they both
It
respect
would
him.
incense his followers. Yeah.
Yeah, because he shows respect to him as a worthy adversary, as a worthy opponent. You know. So, by David mourning for Abner, he is showing respect to the north. If they had had a big celebration about, yeah, my general killed your general, he came over here to try to side with us and we killed him. That's going to alienate the north. So instead, David.
Still a political move.
Oh yeah, it's very much a political public move to show mourning for this. And David says, should Abner have died? This is verse 33. Should Abner have died as the lawless die? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered. You fell as one falls before wicked men. And all the people wept. And David then starts a fast. You know, he fasts in honor of the fallen Abner. And, see, verse 36. All the people took note and were pleased. Indeed, everything the king did pleased them. So on that day, all the people and all of Israel knew that the king had no part in the murder of Abner, son of Ner. So this is all politics to solidify his reputation on both the north and the south. Okay? Because he says, the king memorializing Abner, verse 38, don't you realize that a prince and a great man has fallen? And today, though I am the anointed king, I am weak. And these sons of Zerah are too strong for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil deeds. So he's his own general, he's throwing under the bus. Saying, hey, he did it on his own. That wasn't on my orders. Because he wants to make sure his own reputation is good on both sides of the political aisle. Well, Ishbosheth is still king, although he's getting weaker and weaker. Verse 4, Ishbosheth, son of Saul, heard that Abner died, lost courage, all Israel became alarmed, and without going through it, there's a couple of kind of hooligans who decide they're going to assassinate Ishbosheth, which they do. In verse 6, they go into where Ishbosheth is sleeping, stab him in the stomach as he's laying on his bed. And then they cut off his head and bring it to David. And what are they thinking? Yeah, we'll get a reward for killing your rival. So these two guys, they assassinate Ishbosheth, cut off his head, bring the head to David, and go, look, you know, here's the head of your enemy. Again, you can almost predict now what David's going to do with these two guys. David answered these two guys, Rechab and his brother Baanah. As surely as the Lord lives, who has delivered me out of all trouble, when a man told me Saul is dead, and thought he was bringing good news, I seized him and put him to death in Ziklag. That was the reward I gave him for his news. How much more, when wicked men have killed an innocent man in his own house and on his own bed, should I not now demand his blood from your hand and rid the earth of you? So David gave an order to his men, and they killed them. David cut off their hands and their feet and hung their bodies by the pool of Hebron.
Whoa.
But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in Abner's tomb. So David is not, you know, because they're like, we killed Saul's son for you. David, best friend, was Saul's other son. David's not going to reward these two guys for assassinating Ishbosheth. He's going to kill him for doing it. So it's like, now we have two examples of people who've come to David thinking, hey, look what we did, reward us, and they end up, of course, being executed for it. But David, in every step of the way, is consolidating the favor of the people and consolidating power. And at this moment, now with Ishbosheth dead, the northern tribes all come and say, we want you to be the king of the whole thing, which is, of course, what David wanted all along. So David is made king over everything. 5:3. The elders of Israel came to King David at Hebron. The king made a compact with him at Hebron and before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 40 years. In Hebron, he reigned over Judah for 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem, he reigned over all of Israel and Judah for 33 years. So, 7 years as just the king of the south, and then 33 more years as the king of north and south. But there's a city that they have not conquered yet. It's Jerusalem. Jerusalem is not yet under Israel control. And they said, the thing was, it's unconquerable. Can't be done. Can't be done. It's on a high hill. It's got great defenses. You can't conquer Jerusalem. But David does what can't be done. He conquers Jerusalem, and he calls it the city of David. And notice 5:10, he became more and more powerful because the Lord God Almighty was with him. So, he conquers Jerusalem and makes it his capital. Again, strategically. Why? Why Jerusalem?
Because it's very, like you said, it was very important. They couldn't.
Yeah, it's a strong city, but even more strategically, politically, not militarily, what is it about Jerusalem that makes it strategically the capital of the whole country? Is it an existing city of the northern kingdom? No. Is it an existing city of the southern kingdom? No. It's right between the northern and the southern kingdom.
Centrally located.
It's centrally located, and why did they make Washington, D.C. the capital of this country? It didn't belong to any state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no state could say, the capital of the country is in our state. They created a District of Columbia to be different from all the other states, so that no one state could be jealous of any other state that the capital was in their state. David does the same thing, just, 1700 years earlier. He makes Jerusalem the capital because it's neither an existing city of the north nor an existing city of the south. It's halfway in between, and it's a neutral site to make his capital. Do you see how savvy David is as a politician? You see how every move he makes is about consolidating power and keeping the people on his side. Then he defeats the Philistines. He's a military leader. So, he's doing everything right. And once he's defeated the Philistines, they decide, they build a palace for David in Jerusalem, and they decide to bring the Ark of the Covenant, which has not been it's been kind of a house, just being sort of guarded. They decide to bring the Ark of the Covenant to the new capital city. So chapter 6 talks about, and they have this huge procession with them carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and they go like 6 feet and stop and sacrifice an animal, and then they go 6 more feet and sacrifice another animal. It was this big procession. And notice at 6:5, David and the whole house of Israel were celebrating with all their might before the Lord, with songs and harps and lyres and tambourines and sistrums and cymbals. And they're going through this huge celebration, bringing the Ark of the Covenant into the capital city. Verse 13, 6:13, when those who were carrying the Ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fatted calf. David, wearing a linen ephod, danced before the Lord with all of his might, while he and the entire house of Israel brought up the Ark of the Lord with shouts and sounds of trumpets. There's this huge parade of celebration to bring the Ark into Jerusalem. But we're told in verse 16, as the Ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. And when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. David keeps dancing, and the party keeps going. And David, again, an astute politician, verse 19, he gave a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, and a cake of raisins to every person in the crowd, both men and women. And a chicken in every pot. And all the people went home happy. So everybody gets food, everybody's partying and celebrating this ark coming to Jerusalem. And David gets home. Verse 20, when David returned home to bless his household, Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet him and said, how the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, disrobing in the sight of the slave girls of his servants as any vulgar fellow would. Notice it says he was dancing in a linen ephod, basically a gown. He's leaping and dancing. What did people not wear in those days?
Yeah.
Yeah, there is no such thing as underwear. So, at least the most common understanding here is David is flashing the crowd as he's doing this. And as he's dancing around, wearing this linen ephod, and his wife, Saul's daughter, how the king has distinguished himself today. You know, disrobing in the sight of the slave girls like a vulgar fellow. You know. So she's disgusted at his behavior in this parade. And notice David's reply to that. David said to Michal, 21, "It was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house when he appointed me, ruler over the Lord's people Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this. I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But by these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor." And Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. It's like, you want to see undignified? I'll be more undignified. He's not taking it from her at all. So all of this gives you a picture of who David is. He is passionate about God. I mean, which is his good quality. He is passionate about the Ark of the Covenant. He's passionate about the fighting for the nation of Israel. He's passionate about fighting for God against the enemies of the people. But he's also somewhat ruthless. And chapter 7 is probably one of the key chapters in the whole thing, because he's in his palace, and he says, chapter 7, "After the king had settled in his palace, the Lord gave him rest from all his enemies. He said to Nathan the prophet, 'Here I am living in a palace of cedar, and the ark of God remains in a tent.' Nathan replied to the king, 'Well, whatever you have in mind, go ahead and do it. The Lord's with you.'" In other words, he's like, I'm in a palace, and God's, we're still using the tabernacle for the Ark of the Covenant. We need to build a temple. Not just a tent for the Ark. We need to build a temple. And then Nathan the prophet says, "Yeah, go ahead, the Lord's with you." But that night, the Lord speaks to the prophet Nathan, and here's the message he's to give. Verse 5, 7:5. "Go tell my servant David, this is what the Lord says. Are you the one to build me a house to dwell in? I haven't dwelt in a house from the day I brought the Israelites out of Egypt to this day. I've been moving from place to place with a tent as my dwelling. Wherever I've moved with all the Israelites, did I ever say to any of the rulers whom I commanded to shepherd my people, 'Why have you not built me a house of cedar?' Now then, tell my servant David, this is what the Lord Almighty says. I took you from the pasture and from following the flock to be the ruler of my people. I've been with you wherever you've gone. I've cut off all your enemies before you. Now I will make your name great, like the names of the greatest men on earth. I'll provide a place for my people Israel, and will plant them so that they can have a home of their own and no longer be disturbed. Wicked people will not oppress them anymore, as they did at the beginning, and have done ever since the time I appointed leaders over my people. I'll give you rest from your enemies. The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your fathers, I'll raise up your offspring to succeed you, who will come after your own body. I'll establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever." Go on. So, one of the things that a play on words that works in both Hebrew and in English. David says to God, "I want to build a house for you." And God says to David, "No, I will build a house for you." The house of David. In other words, house meaning the legacy, like the House of Windsor or the House of, like the establish a dynasty. So the word house, double meaning. House like a building, or house like the house of a royal family. So he's like, you're not going to build my house, the temple. Your son's going to do that. He says, your son will build my house, the temple, but I will establish your kingdom, and it will be a kingdom that will have an everlasting throne. Which, of course, we, at least as Christians, would say that prophecy and that promise actually is fulfilled in Jesus. Jesus is the descendant of David with the everlasting throne. Jesus is the son of David, whose kingdom never ends, whose kingdom is established for all eternity. Which is why, if you remember, when Jesus is riding his donkey into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, what name do the people give him? Yeah, Messiah. What else they call him? Son of David. Son of David. Not literal, like Andrew is my son. Son as in descendant. The son of, but they call Jesus the Son of David. They say, Hosanna, Son of David. Hosanna, which means rescue us, or deliver us, or save us. Hosanna, Son of David. And it is the establishment of the Davidic throne through Christ that we would say this promise is ultimately fulfilled. And so Nathan gives this message to David, and David says, who am I? And there's who am I to be, your chosen one? And, he promises to be faithful to God and blesses him, and all that is chapter 7. And so, David, chapter 8, is basically a list of all the battles that he wins. I'm not going to go through all those. David keeps winning battles. He keeps expanding his territory. He keeps defeating these other kings. He keeps getting booty and plunder from these battles. And then 8:15, David reigned over all Israel, doing what was just and right for all of his people. Joab, son of Zeruiah, was over his army. General Joab. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahihud, was his recorder. Zadok, son of Ahitub. And these guys were priests, secretary, etc., etc. And his sons were royal advisors. David, a little side story in chapter 9. David's like, is there anybody left, especially from my good friend Jonathan, that I can show some kindness to? And they say, well, yeah, there is. There's this descendant of Jonathan named Mephibosheth. Jonathan's son Mephibosheth is still alive. He is a cripple. He is crippled in his feet. And they find out that the way he was crippled was because when his nursemaid was carrying him and fleeing, she dropped him and broke his feet. And of course, in those days, there's no fixing that. So David says, well, I want to show kindness to the son of Jonathan. So he says, I'm going to give him back the property of Saul, and I'm going to have him eat at my table. And he summons one of his servants, Ziba, and says, you're to look after Mephibosheth. And Ziba says, 9:11, Ziba said to the king, your servant will do whatever my lord the king commands. Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah. All the members of Zida's household were servants of Mephibosheth, and Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table, and he was crippled in both feet. And the fact that he's crippled in both feet is going to come into play in a later story. So David wants to show kindness to Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth. Okay, so then chapter 10, again, David wins another battle. We're not going to go into all that, but he wins another battle. Then we get to probably other than the David and Goliath story, probably the most famous story of David is chapter 11. 2 Samuel 11. In the spring, the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army, and they destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. That's a little different, the fact that they make that point. David did not go with the army this time. He's getting older. He's not personally involved in battle as much anymore. So he's back in Jerusalem. The army's off fighting. Verse 2. One evening, David got up from his bed, walked around on the roof of the palace, which the roof of those days is like, you know, it's the place where you'd go to get cool. I mean, it's a flat roof. You walk around. And of course, his palace is going to be one of the highest, if not the highest roof in all of town. You go up there just to watch and get cool and whatever. He goes up the roof, and from the roof he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "Isn't this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" In other words, Uriah is a mercenary in his army. Uriah is one of David's soldiers, but he's not an Israelite. He's a Hittite, but he's fighting with David's men. Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David saying, "I am pregnant." Now, that's, you know, we kind of would wish there was a little more detail there. I mean, not you know, salacious detail, but like, did she object at all? Was she, how willing was she? I mean, how did this actually play out? Did they just send for her, like, the king wants to see you? I mean, we're not told really the details of this. He saw her, he sent for her, they brought her to him, he slept with her, he sent her on her way.
She really didn't have a choice.
Yeah, she didn't have a choice. I'd say, is this how she did have a choice? Whether she was flattered or horrified, we're not really told. Which of those two extremes, if either is true, but the bottom line was he's the king and he gets what he wants. But he didn't count on her being pregnant. So, he's like, I got to cover this up. So he sends word to Joab. Verse 6, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." And Joab sent him to David. Uriah came to him, and David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, how the war was going. David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." Now, again, I didn't know this till seminary. Wash your feet is Hebrew euphemism for have sex.
Oh.
Okay? You know, every language has its euphemisms. Like, you know, they still say somebody's going to go powder their nose. They're not going to powder their nose. You know, there's euphemisms for all kinds of things. And in Hebrew, the feet are often, a man's feet and a man's genitals are often compared, and you know, the remarks are sometimes, when they say something about the feet, they're really talking about something else. So, wash your feet is a Hebrew euphemism for, while you're here, go home and, you know, sleep with your wife. So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the enters of the palace with his master's servants and didn't go down to his house. Because what does David obviously want to happen? Huh? He wants Uriah to sleep with Bathsheba so that when she starts showing her pregnancy, he will assume that the baby is his. So he calls Uriah home from the battlefield, so he'll go have sex with Bathsheba, and then when she starts to say she's pregnant, he will go, "Oh, well, she got pregnant when I was home on leave." But Uriah won't do it. He doesn't go to his house. He sleeps there in the palace gateway. Verse 10, David was told, Uriah didn't go home. Ask him, haven't you just come from a distance? Why didn't you go home? You know, don't you want to see your wife? And Uriah said to David, the ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my master Joab and the Lord's men are camped in the open fields. How could I go to my house and eat and drink and lie with my wife? Surely as you live, I won't do such a thing. How can I go enjoy myself when my buddies are there on the front lines? No, no, no. I'm not going to enjoy myself while my buddies are out there, on the battlefield. So, verse 12. David says to him, well, stay here one more day. Tomorrow I'll send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. At David's invitation, he ate and drank with him, and David made him drunk. He's thinking, I'll get him drunk, and then he'll go sleep with his wife. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat with the master's servants. He didn't go home. So he can't get this guy to go home and sleep with his wife. And that's what his goal is, to cover up her pregnancy. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it he wrote, put Uriah in the front line where the fighting is fiercest, then withdraw from him so he'll be struck down and die.
Whoa.
So he can't get him to go home and sleep with Bathsheba, so he's going to have to kill him. And, have you heard, the phrase, carrying his own death warrant? That's exactly what he says. He writes a note to Joab that seals it up with the king's seal and says to Uriah, give this to General Joab when you get back to the front lines. And the letter is, make sure Uriah is at the point and gets killed in battle. So, that's what Joab does. And sure enough, Uriah gets killed in battle. In verse 18, Joab sent David a full account of the battle. He instructed a messenger, when you have finished giving the king the account of the battle, the king's anger may flare up. He may ask, why'd you get so close to the city to fight? Didn't you know they would shoot arrows from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal? Didn't a woman throw an upper millstone on him from the wall that he died in Thebez? Why'd you get so close to the wall? If he asks you this, then say to him, also, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead. So the messenger set out. When he arrived, he told David everything Joab had said to him. And the messenger said to David, the men overpowered us and came out against us in the open, and we drove them back to the entrance. And they archers shot arrows at your servants from the wall, and some of the king's men died. And moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead. And David's response is, say this to Joab. Don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as the other. Press the attack against the city and destroy it. Like, well, these things happen. Because he's not worried about the fact they lost the battle. He's relieved that his problem has now gone away and that Uriah is dead. And he thinks, all right, well, problem solved. And after it says, when Uriah's wife heard her husband was dead, she mourned for him. And then David had her brought into his house, and she became one of his wives and bore him a son. But then that last little verse, but the thing David had done displeased the Lord. So, God sends the prophet Nathan to him and to tell him a little story. He comes to him and says, there were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle. The poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb he had bought. He raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food and drank from his cup and slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the man who had come to him. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, as surely as the Lord lives, that man who did this deserves to die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over. He did such a thing and had no pity. And Nathan said, you are the man. You are the man. Think about how much guts it takes for Nathan to say that. You're the man with no pity. You're the man who took the one little lamb when you had a whole harem full. You're the man. And then he says, verse 7, Nathan said to David, you're the man. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you, and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if all of this had been too little, I would have given you even more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now therefore the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own. This is what the Lord says. Out of your own household I'm going to bring calamity upon you. Before your very eyes I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you. He'll lie with your wives in broad daylight. You did it in secret. I'll do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel. And David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. Now, he's the king. He could have said to Nathan, well, I'm the king, and you're a dead man. And no one will ever know any of this. And he could have ordered Nathan executed on the spot. But he doesn't. He says, you're right. I've sinned. You're right. And Nathan said, the Lord's taken away your sin. You're not going to die. But because by doing this you have made the enemies of the Lord show utter contempt, the son born to you will die. And in other words, Bathsheba's, this child that he had been so anxious to cover up the pregnancy, this child is going to die. And then I won't read all of this, but David fasts and prays, but the child dies. It says that when they tell David that the child is dead, 12:19. David, on this it says, verse 18. On the seventh day the child died. David's servants were afraid to tell him the child was dead. They thought, well, the child was still living. We spoke to David. He wouldn't listen to us. How can we tell him the child is dead? He may do something desperate. David noticed his servants were whispering, and he realized the child was dead. Is the child dead, he asked. Yes, they said he's dead. David got up from the ground. After he had washed, put on lotions, changed his clothes, he went into the house of the Lord and worshipped. Went to his own house. At his request, they served him food, and he ate. His servants asked him, why are you acting this way? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept. Now the child is dead, you get up and eat? He said, while the child was still alive, I fasted and wept. I thought, who knows? The Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live. But now that he's dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I'll go to him, but he won't return to me. He comforted his wife Bathsheba. He went to her and lay with her, and she gave birth to a son, and they named him Solomon. So we're not even told the name of the child who died. He's never given a name in the story. But the second child that he and Bathsheba have together is Solomon. And of course, Solomon is going to play quite a role in this saga down the road. Now, if you thought it was already bad, it's going to get worse in chapter 13. Because David has multiple wives, and all these sons of his all are half-brothers. Okay? He's got all these sons, and they all have different mothers. So he's got a whole bunch of sons that are all half-brothers. Chapter 13. In the course of time, Amnon, which is one of David's sons, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David. So Amnon one of David's sons, falls in love with his half-sister and brother, falls in love with Tamar, who is the full sister of Absalom. So Absalom and Amnon are half-brothers. Amnon and Tamar are half-siblings. So Amnon falls in love with his half-sister, Tamar. And he's obsessed with her. And he's like, Dad's never going to let me marry my half-sister. That's not going to happen. And his friends are like, well, why are you looking so down? And he says, well, I'm in love with Tamar, my brother's sister. And his friend says, verse 5, go to bed and pretend to be ill. When your father comes to see you, say to him, I'd like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare the food in my sight so I can watch her and then eat it from her hand. And so that's what he does. I want my sister Tamar to come and feed me. I'm sick. Tamar makes him food. She brings in the food. Middle of verse 9. Send everyone out of here, Amnon said. Everyone left. Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food here into my bedroom so I can eat it from your hand. Tamar took the bread she had prepared and brought it to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. But when she took it to him to eat, he grabbed her and said, come to bed with me, my sister. Don't, my brother, she said to him. Don't force me. Such a thing would not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing. What about me? How could I get rid of my disgrace? What about you? You'd be like one of the wicked fools. Speak to the king. He won't keep me from being married to you. But he refused to listen to her, and since he was stronger than she, he raped her. Then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he loved her. And he said to her, get up and get out. No, she said, sending me away would be a greater wrong than what you've already done. But he refused to listen to her. He called his personal servant and said, get this woman out of here. Bolt the door after her. His servant put her out and bolted the door after her. She was wearing a richly ornamented robe, for she was the kind of garment the virgin daughters of the king wore. She put ashes on her head and tore the robe she was wearing. She put her hand on her head and went away, weeping as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, has that Amnon your brother been with you? Be quiet now, my sister. He's your brother. Don't take this thing to heart. And Tamar lived with her brother Absalom's house, a desolate woman. When King David heard this, he was furious. Absalom never said a word to Amnon, either good or bad. He hated Amnon because he had disgraced his sister, Tamar. And what did David do to punish Amnon?
I love it right now.
Nothing.
No, doesn't do anything.
Nothing. David does nothing to punish Amnon. But Absalom is not going to forget this. 2 years later, Absalom bides his time. 2 years later, he's going to have a party. And he says, I'd like my brother Amnon to come to the party. And they're like, oh, well, all right. And without reading all of it, he tells his servants, when Amnon gets drunk, and I say, strike him, kill him. And that's exactly what happens. They wait till Amnon is drunk, and then Absalom gives the signal, and they kill Amnon in revenge. It says, verse 28, 13:20, Absalom ordered his men, listen, when Amnon's in high spirits from drinking wine, and I say to you, strike Amnon down, kill him. Don't be afraid. Have I not given you the order? Be strong and brave. So Absalom's men did to Amnon what Absalom had ordered. Then all the king's sons got up, mounted their mules, and fled. The other sons who were at the party all hightailed it out of there. While they're on their way, the report came to David, Absalom has struck down all the king's sons. Not one of them is left. This is fake news at that point. The king stood up, tore his clothes, lay down on the ground. All his servants stood by with their clothes torn. But Jonadab, son of Shemaiah, David's brother, said, no, no, no. they're not all dead. Only Amnon is dead. Only one son's dead. This has been Absalom's expressed intention ever since the day Amnon raped his sister Tamar. My lord the king should not be concerned about the report that all the king's sons are dead. Only Amnon is dead. Meanwhile, Absalom had fled. Okay. So, Absalom, after he kills his brother, flees. And he actually goes to Geshur, which we find out if you follow back who his mother was. That's where his mother was from. Because remember, David is marrying women to make political alliances with other countries, which of course happened for centuries after this. So he goes back to his mother's region and flees after he commits this murder. But notice it says in verse 39, the spirit of the king longed to go to Absalom. He was consoled concerning Amnon's bed. So David, like, oh, he's in exile, he's run away, but man, I really miss Absalom. So, Joab, verse 14, or chapter 14, Joab knew the king's heart longed for Absalom. So, without going into all the details, Joab tries to engineer a way for Absalom to come back to Jerusalem. And he convinces this woman to sort of tell a story that's a parable of, lost family and forgive and forget and all this. And anyway, David sees through her, but he agrees, okay. He sees Joab's hand in this. So he's like, all right, he can come back to Jerusalem, but he can't come to me. He can come back to town, but I'm not going to see him. So Absalom comes back to Jerusalem, but he doesn't actually see the king. The king said, 14:24, he can go to his own house, he mustn't see my face. So Absalom went to his own house and didn't see the face of the king. Verse 28, he lived 2 years in Jerusalem without seeing the king's face. And he gets frustrated. And he wants Joab to intercede. And finally, he burns down Joab's crops to get Joab to come and talk to him. And he's like, why am I here if I can't see the king? So Joab goes to David and convinces David to let Absalom come into the palace and see him. And so there at the end of chapter 14:33, Joab went to the king, told him all this. The king summoned Absalom, came in and bowed down to his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. And everything's hunky-dory now. It's not. It's not. So Absalom takes up residence at the city gates. He's got himself a chariot, and this is what he does. He's learned politics. Chapter 15. In the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses to go with, and with 50 men to run ahead of him. He'd get up early and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. Whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him, "What town are you from?" He'd answer, "Well, your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your claims are valid and proper, but there's no representative of the king to hear you." And Absalom would add, "If only I were appointed judge in the land, then everyone who has a complaint or a case could come to me, and I would see that he gets justice." Also, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand, take a hold of him, and kiss him. Absalom behaved in this way towards all the Israelites who came to the king asking for justice. And so he stole the hearts of the men of Israel. I often say, it's not just me, times change, clothes change, technology changes, all these things change. But people are the same. I mean, this is politics 101.
Yeah.
You know? There. Hey, how you doing? Hey, where are you from? Oh, I'm from this. Oh, that's a great place. Well, what are you doing here? Well, I came seeking justice. So I got this complaint. oh man, yeah, you're probably not gonna get anywhere with what they're up there, you know. Now, I know if I were the judge, I mean, I would definitely rule in your favor. But, you know, and, oh, don't bow down here, come on, give me a hug, oh, come on, all right. I mean, isn't every political campaign built on, if I were there, everything would be great. If you just elected me, you know, everything would be rosy, all these problems would go away. If only I was in power, everything would be great. Too bad you go up there now and you're not going to get anything. This is what they call door-to-door politics. This is, you know, shaking hands and kissing babies. This is, and he wins the hearts with all these promises. And he's good looking and all this stuff. And so, Absalom's, verse 10, Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, say, Absalom is king in Hebron. 200 men from Jerusalem had accompanied Absalom. They'd been invited as guests and went quite innocently, knowing nothing about the matter. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he also sent for Ahithophel, the Gileonite, David's counselor, to come from Gilo, his hometown. And so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's following kept on increasing. A messenger came and told David, the hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. David said to his officials who were with him, come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he'll move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin upon us and put the city to the sword. So David and his entire household flee to get away from Absalom, from this rebellion. Because David realizes Absalom's got a stronger force now than he has. So David runs from his son. On his way out back to the Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, Saul's grandson, he runs into that servant that he appointed to help him. And the servant says, you know, that Mephibosheth, he's trying to get control now. He's trying to come into power and claim his claim to the throne. And David says, well, okay, well, servant, you get all of his property. Kind of, you know, as he's kind of leaving town. He makes a snap decision about that. Well, not to go into all the details, but now we have, once again, David is on the run. Just like he'd been on the run from Saul, now he's on the run from his own son. And luckily, Absalom has some bad advice. It says this kind of a spy gets in there and gives him some really bad advice because if he hadn't had the bad advice, he would have killed David. But one of David's loyal men pretends to be loyal now to Absalom, gives him terrible advice that Absalom follows that allows David to get away. And I won't get into all that whole story. But it comes down to a battle between people loyal to David and the people loyal to Absalom. So chapter 18. David mustered the men who were with him, appointed over them commanders and thousands and hundreds. He sent his troops out, a third under Joab, a third under Joab's brother Abishai, a third under Ittai the Gittite. And the king said, I myself will march out with you. And they're like, no. You got to stay in the city. You can't go. And he's like, all right. So the king, verse 4, halfway through 4. King stood beside the gate while all the men marched out in units of hundreds and thousands. And the king commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, the three generals, be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake. What does that mean? Yeah, don't kill him. Take him alive. Don't kill Absalom. So, they go out and they fight. Chapter 9, or verse 9. Absalom happened to meet David's men. He was riding his mule, and as the mule went under the thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's head got caught in a tree. He was left hanging in midair, while the mule he was on kept going. When one of the men saw this, he told Joab, I just saw Absalom hanging in an oak tree. Joab said to the man, what? You saw him? Why didn't you strike him to the ground right there? I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a warrior's belt. The man replied, even if 1,000 shekels were weighed out from my hand, I wouldn't lift my hand against the king's son. In our hearing, the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai protect the young man Absalom. If I put my life in jeopardy, nothing's hidden from the king, you would have kept your distance. Joab said, I'm not going to wait for this for you. So Joab took 3 javelins in his hands and plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. And 10 of Joab's armor bearers surrounded Absalom, struck him, and killed him. So Absalom's like, Joab's like, I'm not going to, this is ridiculous. He kills Absalom. They sound the trumpet, and all the people following Absalom flee. And then they get back, they send word to David. And they send messengers, and David sees the guy coming, the messenger is like, well, he's a good guy, he must be bringing good news. And, which, 18:27, he's a good man, he comes with good news. And Amaz called out to the king, all is well! He bowed down before the king with his face to the ground and said, praise be to the Lord your God. He's delivered up the men who lifted their hands against my lord the king. The king asked, is the young man Absalom safe? He answered, I saw great confusion just as Joab was about to send the king's servants and me. I don't know what it was. Now stand aside, wait here. Then the second messenger arrives. My lord the king, hear the good news. The Lord has delivered you today from all who rose up against you. The king said, is the young man Absalom safe? The Cushite replied, may the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up to harm you be like that young man. The king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. And as he went, he said, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. Not what he wanted to hear. So, Joab arrives. And they say, the king's in there crying. And this is where, I mean, this is the scene. If you, I don't know why this whole thing hasn't been made into a movie. Because I mean, it would be bloody. I mean, I think it has. I think they've made David's story into a movie, but I don't think they've ever done all of this political. Yeah, it used to be a mini-series or something.
Yeah.
So Joab gets back, and they say, well, the king's in there crying. Verse 5, 19:5. Joab went into the house to the king and said, today you have humiliated all your men, who have just saved your life, and the lives of your sons and daughters, and the lives of your wives and your concubines. You love those who hate you, and you hate those who love you. You have made it clear today that the commanders and their men mean nothing to you. I see that you would be pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead. Now go out and encourage your men. I swear by the Lord that if you don't go out, not a man will be left with you by nightfall. This will be worse for you than all the calamities that have come upon you from your youth until now. So the king got up and took his seat in the gateway. When the men were told, the king is sitting in the gateway, they came out before him. So, I mean, Joab gets in David's face. And that statement, you love the people who hate you and you hate the people who love you. And these men fighting for you, and they win the victory, and you go in and start crying. That you'd be happier if the rebel was alive and they were all dead. If you don't go out there right now and congratulate them, if you don't go out to your men right now and congratulate them and thank them for their service, you won't have a single man left by morning. David sees the wisdom of that and goes out and does what Joab has recommended. Now, this is really the climax of the story. The rest of it is kind of some battles that are not nearly as important or as interesting, frankly, and some poems and some songs and some censuses and all kinds of other things. But this is really the climax of the story, the rebellion of Absalom. And think about what Nathan said to him after he slept with Bathsheba and killed Uriah. What did he say about it? About his household.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be,
Except we never end.
yeah, the sword will never leave your house. That's what happens. So, we come to this, and really, the end of this book is really the end of David's story. We have at the beginning of 1 Kings, as David is now old, and who's going to succeed him is the drama that we'll look at next time. And of course, spoiler alert, it's Solomon. But how Solomon gets there is a twisted story too, because Solomon is not the firstborn, or even close, should not be the next in line. So how Solomon becomes king is its own story. But having gone through this, all this story, what do you think of David?
Not much is right. Yeah, when you read about David's story, you take him off the pedestal and put him down in real earth, among men, because he's not what, you always think of him king of David, but after reading about him, forget that.
Yeah, what?
I think that, God can still be with David and love David after all this. I think, we have a shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one thing that David never turns away from God.
No.
I mean, he makes horrible mistakes, but he never rejects God. I mean, I think the thing that saves David's reputation from is he a hero or a villain? Well, he's a human that has, I think his best moment in the whole thing is not killing Goliath or winning battles. I think David's best moment is when Nathan says, "You're the man." And David is the king, and at that moment David could have said, "Well, I am the man. I'm the king, and you're a dead man." And he could have said, "I'm going to keep covering up this sin," and he could have had Nathan executed and gone on his way. But David doesn't do that. When Nathan says, "You're the man," David's response is, "I've sinned." David's response is repentance. David's response is to admit his sin.
Right.
And I think that is David's finest moment. And the reason why, when we think of David, we don't think of him as a bad guy. We still think of him heroically, even with his sin, even with he's a terrible father, obviously. And he makes a horrible decision with the whole Bathsheba situation. So he's flawed, but he also is passionate for God. The Bible refers to him as the man after God's heart. He had a heart for God. He was a sinner, but he had a heart for God. And when faced with his sin, he admitted it. And when the consequence of his sin, it says the consequence of one of his sin was the child died. And it says after the child died, he washed his face and went in and worshipped. That was his response. He went in and worshipped. I mean, you read this, and then you read some of the Psalms of David. And you think about the one that we know the best, the 23rd Psalm. We'll get to the book of Psalms here in a few weeks, but you think about David talking about God as his shepherd. Even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, that David looks to God as his shepherd. But David is a complicated man, and he's not an angel. He's not what we would call a saint. he's a man who builds Israel and unites Israel. And, you know, he does a lot of good things and he does some really terrible. But when I think about him being a terrible father, you know, I think about John Wesley, our Methodist founder, who was a terrible husband. I mean, he wasn't abusive, he was just neglectful. I mean, Wesley married a widow and then never spent any time with her, ever, until she finally left him, because he was always out on the road preaching. I mean, but Wesley was a terrible husband. And so even great men are flawed. You know, even great men or great women are flawed. There's only one perfect person in this book. You know, and he's a descendant of David. But Jesus is the only perfect person in this book. And everybody else is flawed. And I think. Go ahead. What?
I was going to tell Phyllis.
Yeah, well, go tell him.
You have a more charitable heart than I do.
Well, not always, yeah. I don't know. As I say, he's not somebody you can easily put in the hero or the villain column. He's the, you know, yeah. But there's very few.
Had a huge ego.
Oh, well, yeah. And
All leaders do.
yeah, I was gonna say, to be the lead of country, you have to have a big ego. You have to have a lot of confidence, and you have to have a lot of
Yeah.
chutzpah, as we say. But yeah, I hope that this story of David, all the way from his days as killing Goliath, all the way through his family falling apart, and everything in between. I mean, that you have a picture of this man that is a little more complete, you know, a little more, he's a real person. I mean, that's the thing. So you read some of the, you know, religious literature of other religions, and they read very much like mythology. You know, you read this story and like, these are real people. You know, I mean, everything from the generals and the betrayals and the politics of the whole thing. I mean, these are real people. And David is a real person who, you know, with time, you know, when the people are wanting a Messiah, their vision of what the Messiah is going to look like is David. That's what they think a Messiah is like. And of course, when Jesus comes, he is not at all like that picture of what they're picturing. The military man who's going to conquer the Romans. That's what they think they want. But Jesus comes as a different kind of Messiah. Remember, the word Messiah means anointed one. And that's, you know, David is anointed by Samuel. But we refer to Jesus as great David's greater son. So this is David, and we haven't quite finished his story because we have to see who is going to succeed him and how that comes about. And we're going to discover that Solomon is also not a perfect person. I mean, we're going to see Solomon is a flawed person as well. In fact, there's not going to be really any of the kings that we're going to read about who are without flaws. Yeah, how we judge them, we're going to have to, let's do a column, good, strong side, weak side, you know, good points, bad points. But anyway, well.